Welcome, everybody. We are going to start letting attendees in and get started. Welcome to our January 25th board study session. We are gathered tonight to kind of dive into some topics. There's no action that is going to be taken tonight. This is just the opportunity to hear from some of our district staff on some special projects going on. Before we get started though, I am going to do roll call, starting with Director Decker.
I'm here, even though you can't see me. Sorry about that.
Director Smith.
Here.
Director Sproul.
Here.
And Director Zavala-Ortega.
Here.
And I am also here, Director Barrows. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Snell to introduce our presenters tonight.
Thank you, Director Barrows. It's good to see everyone this evening. Thank you for taking the time to be here for this study session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now and make sure that that's working for everyone. Seeing that okay? Great. So this evening, we have 4 topics on the agenda. 2 are focused on a student learning goal. 1 is around board development, and the 4th one is our ongoing pandemic planning and response update. So we have some guest speakers from staff to walk you through some of this information. Some of these we're cycling back again. So we've talked about cell curriculum and screeners earlier in the year, and now we have some data to share with you. Some of these are new topics for the year, like the highly capable program. So really trying to, like what we did with the dual language, is give an overview and make sure the board directors have a common understanding before we dive deeper. The board development one, Brett's going to kind of talk a little about the process for budget development and some of the factors that go into that are traditional in a budget cycle, and some of the things that are unique this year as we look at board development. So with that, are there any questions before we get into the content tonight? For our presentation, you're welcome to unmute and ask questions. We also will put in time in between each topic area to entertain questions or thoughts if the board directors would like to comment on what's been presented. So just know you have that space. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bill Oman, and he'll introduce our first topic tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Snell. Hi, board. It is great to see everyone. I know we'll have Darcy Frank will be joining us soon, but I can get us started as we talk about student learning and our SEL curriculum and our screeners. So this is the first year that we have had a core curriculum in SEL. We're working through our adoption this year, and it's the first year where we had a universal screener. And so what we've been able to do this year is pilot the panorama survey. We've had lots of communication with schools and with you around the panorama survey and what that measures. And today we're going to give just a brief overview of some of the state SEL standards, the law around that, a little bit about the panorama survey, a couple of trends, and then what that means for our building leaders and more importantly for our students and families. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Director Darcy Frank.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for giving us some time to share our data with you. So one of the things that Bill mentioned were the SEL standards, and that is something that we're really focused on this year, that we are working very hard to provide supports to kind of strengthen that core, and paying attention and being very mindful about self-awareness, self-management, self-efficacy, which are 3 of the standards, and then social awareness, social management, and social engagement. So really learning about yourself and learning about others and interacting with others. So those are our standards. Next slide, please. And in order to help us make sure that we're meeting students' needs, we need to hear from them. So, the best way to learn about your building's culture and climate is to talk to students and ask them and get feedback from students. So we really want that student voice, and that is what the Panorama data has helped provide for us. So in looking at the data, we have a couple themes. Supportive relationships, that was an area of strength. So students responded favorably when asked questions around, do you have strong relationships with adults in your building? Do you have strong relationships with other students in your building, with your peers? So that was an area that we noted was pretty high. Theme two, what we looked at was maybe a place where we could do some work. So sense of belonging. The students' connection to their school community and activities and things they could be involved in. Do they feel a real part of that community? So that's a place that we looked at as a district, might be an area that we could kind of focus on and provide some supports. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just share some district data with you today. So as we go through the next few slides, you'll notice that the blue indicates the percentage of students, and this is grades 3 through 5 in this first slide, that answered favorably with questions around supportive relationships and building those connections. And then the little green dot there is where we are compared to other districts nationally who also have their students answer this question. So then with the self-management, again, the number of students, 3-5, who answered favorably to those questions within that topic, and then where we compare to other districts nationally. Next slide, please. And here are the rest of the topics. So the social awareness, positive feelings, growth mindset, self-efficacy, and challenging feelings. And again, the blue indicates the percentage of positive responses, and then where we are nationally. And that's just good information for us to take a look at, because again, that student voice is really important. Next slide, thank you. And these are the results for grades 6-12. And again, the supportive relationships, the self-management, the social awareness. So the percent that indicated positive responses, and then that national comparison. Next slide, please. And then again, we go into our growth mindset, positive feelings, challenging feelings, emotion regulation, and self-efficacy. And again, this is responses 6-12. And next slide, please. And this was the overall kind of more about culture, climate, overall school feeling. So that, again, that sense of belonging in 3-5. And next slide, please. And then the 6-12 has a few more questions, and the additional topics, diversity and inclusion, and then again, sense of belonging. So for professional development, next slide, please. We took principals and counselors through a kind of a model of how they could look at their building data and do a data dive using their building data, kind of analyze and come up with some strengths, some areas that they might want to work on. So really, again, this is about strengthening that building relationship, and celebrating the strengths, and the ways that we might want to kind of help students and with those cell competencies. So we do have some supports that we are providing some PD around. Panorama has a playbook of things. So suggestions, if you're seeing that students aren't answering as favorably as you would like in one topic, then here are some ideas for how to address that in your building. Student check-ins, so being able to check in with students and groups on smaller topics. And then we have a resource hub where we put, again, all kinds of resources and different things that buildings can use, counselors can use, teachers can use to work with students, in addition to Second Step and Character Strong, which are those curriculum supports that we provide. And the panoramas, the resources on the site here, I know you can't see very well, but again, we're working really hard with our building teams to provide supports and models for how to work through this data with their teams, and then move on to building plans and supports and supporting students in the classroom to build that culture and climate. So yeah, that is it for that kind of top level look at our panorama data.
I have a question, Darcy. Is the screener, is that done once a year, or is that something that there's like a follow-up screener or something something else that's done maybe in the spring? Because I'm just thinking, you know, like we have this data and then we basically implement an intervention and something to kind of hopefully see growth in either sense of belonging or kind of whatever a building is targeting. But then is there a way kind of at the end to measure? I mean, or do the kids take a second screener or maybe something smaller or something, just to see kind of if it helped increase their perception?
Yeah, asking. Yes, we're planning to do a another implementation in the spring, in late May, early enough so that we can get the data back and take a look at just exactly what you were talking about. Have we made growth? And then being able to look at some of those specific areas of improvement. So we thought that we definitely wanted to do a spring, and we're going to use the same questions so that we can judge that growth.
Okay. And is that the plan, like kind of the normal plan to do it twice a year, like in the fall and then the spring?
Well, we definitely want to do it at least twice.
Yeah.
There has been some discussion around 3 times, but you know, we have a lot of testing, and we know that, so we want to get some input from other stakeholders around, you know, if they would prefer 3 times a year or 2 times a year. Yeah. So since this was the first year using this tool, we've heard really positive things from our building principals and counselors and teams about how valuable the data is. So we're really glad about that. But we definitely want to have some further conversations about how they want to use the data and what we can do to provide those supports and how we want to build that for next year.
That's my main question is how granular a data do the principals get? Like can they break it down at the classroom level, at the grade level? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then what's the participation rate? I mean, I know that families had an opportunity to opt out. We've had a lot of absences. I'm just wondering, like, what percentage do we have data for?
That is, you know what, I don't have the exact percentage. It was pretty high. We
Okay.
did not have much opt out, but I can certainly get you an exact percentage.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no urgency. I'm just curious. And I'm also curious if there's consideration of following the same people that participated. I mean, I know with transition across different schools and moving and mobility, tracking the same cohort of kids that have responded would be probably pretty interesting.
Yep, we have a lot of ways we can look at the data.
Okay.
That was part of what we really liked about the platform.
Well, I will say I've been doing some school visits recently, and I've heard about Panorama on my school visits, and principals do seem to be pretty enthused. So thank you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
It's the first time that we've had a systemic look at this kind of sense of belonging data. And as you know, you're considering an equity policy in February. And when we look at the language of the policy, it's about student belonging and feeling like they're a part of this community. So it's, obviously Darcy highlighted some strengths for our district when we look across the country, but there's also some areas that are concerning. In particular, that sense of belonging at the secondary level. And so we have some work to do collectively and individually with each student as well. So, but before we were just kind of speculating around that, or our surveys were classroom by classroom, school by school, and teachers had a good sense of who was maybe feeling like they were connected to the classroom. But this does allow us to set some goals that we would find in our potential follow-up of the equity policy. We've been talking about the procedures and accountability. And so there could be goals attached to some of these strands. And the other cool thing about the platform is that as you look at the data, you also, Darcy mentioned the playbook. And so there's actual lessons right there that are linked, resources that a teacher could go to. They don't have to come up with it on their own. They can certainly use their own ideas with that, but then also use the resources that are there. So it's pretty cool. Sandra?
I was just wondering, especially for like the middle school and high school, if this data is able to be shared to the students. Because I think sometimes, we take these surveys, but they don't really know kind of what happens to this information. And I don't know, I guess I just wonder for them to acknowledge, that they're not the only ones feeling this way, or and then maybe so they're able to see the progress that the school's made, or so I don't know, just as a secondary, middle school and high school, since I think, it could also be elementary, but I guess just because I feel like they do understand more of what's going on.
Yeah, and actually one of the things that we stressed in our professional development was the fact that the kids have to see that we are doing something with this data. So that was a really important point, that, if they're going to take this and we're going to ask for their input, that we are going to use that input. And we want to be very clear on how we're going to do that. And so yes, that is part of the training. That's part of the protocol that we are taking the principals through, is how to share this data. And again, so that students know and have a strong sense that we are acting on this data.
And I know some of the high schools are already sharing it with their different student leadership groups and getting a feel for what students think of the data and what, how they're reacting.
Thank you.
The comparisons with the national data trends, are those, is that comparative to this year? Or is it just a general data trend nationally? Like, I mean, for instance, like we're getting data now for 2021, 2022 school year. And are we comparing that just to national trends for this school year? Or is it some sort of average over the last few years? Specifically around sense of belonging, I know when we can't have assemblies and we are limited with participation, I wonder, are we comparing apples to apples?
Yeah, and honestly, that's another great question. I don't know. I believe that it is just overall data, that it's not just this fall. But again, I can clarify that.
I know that we're making progress towards getting more of those school building community events, and there's a lot of energy in that direction, but we're not quite there yet. But it seems like that might create that deficiency on sense of belonging, especially if we're comparing against a 3-year trend versus this year.
I'd ask you to as a board, as we share this information, the questions are fantastic. And as you're on site visits and understanding, after an approval of an equity policy, those procedures and what we want to lay out as goals, right? You're seeing a wide range of samples of things that we could consider at the board level. Certainly our schools, as Darcy described, principals are developing plans related to that. Kyle, you saw that in action, but at the district level, what kinds of things would you like to pay attention to as we go through next year? So it's nice to have this year to establish a baseline. And then as we think about our board level goals and that cycle, this could be a powerful set of data, and maybe you want to drill down into the secondary level in particular, as you look at this, or something else. But I think you all recognize that as board directors, you can't be managing all the data sources all the time. So what are the leverage pieces that you would like to see come back?
Is it possible to, and I mean, redact it, not to have any detail, but like to just see a sample report that a principal might see, just to understand what those data points are?
Yeah, absolutely. And we could actually walk you through a cycle too in a future study session where here's the data, this is what happens at the school level, here's what happens on an intervention team, here's some protocols that are in place, and this is maybe the effect of that, right? So we could take you through that inquiry cycle process.
Thank you.
Or additionally too, we could invite you to that process in the school, right? Like, and as you saw in action too, and allow you kind of some insight into what staff are wrestling with. And certainly we have staff that are very skilled in this, and then we have staff that this is new for them. And so helping support them along the way is important too. Any other questions for Darcy or Bill? Well, thank you both for the presentation tonight. And we will include in your weekly update these slides as well. And if you have questions or want to go deeper with something, just let us know. I'm going to reshare my screen and introduce the next topic. Good. Yep. Okay. So the board was interested in looking at highly capable programming, and similar to what we did with dual language, we wanted to provide an overview, answer any questions, and then also build a follow-up presentation more individually tailored for you with opportunities to dialogue as we look at this program and where we would like it to go and where the direction that you provide for us to take it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy and Dr. Erin Lark to share tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening, directors. This was exciting for me. Jeff asked me to head this up, and it gave me the opportunity to learn along with you what we do for our HiCap students, since I'm new to the district and to Washington. So it's been a great opportunity to partner with Darcy and with Dr. Lark. So this one's kind of nested. I get to work with Darcy, and Darcy gets to work with Erin. And so we said to Erin, hey, you're the expert, why don't you present? And so we're going to turn it over to her, and she's going to give you your top level view. And then Darcy and I can continue to support in future sessions and kind of drilling down to what you most want to know. So Erin, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Christy. And thank you everyone for your welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
The first thing I wanted to share is the current status. And so as of today, we have 972 students whose families have accepted services for highly capable in Vancouver. That is approximately 4% of enrollment. And this is a number that's important to me because our national organization suggests that student enrollment should be about 5 to 10% in highly capable programs. This amount does not include the students that are part of the current identification process that is underway as of right now for K-12. And on the right-hand side, you'll see our definition that comes from the OSPI definition about what a highly capable student in Washington looks like. So we are looking at students that are performing significantly advanced when compared to peers in age, in environment, location, and the experiences that they've had. So this number is asterisked because we are in process in increasing that. We know that that will put us in the 5 to 10% range when we're completed. Thank you. Next slide, please. So for that 30,000 foot overview of the services that we have happening in our K-12 continuum, we start with our elementary students. I have identification from kindergarten through 12th grade. That can look different as far as what identification is and what services are available for students as is appropriate for those grade bands. So at elementary, we have general education classrooms. These are neighborhood schools where students would attend the classroom that is in proximity to where they live and receive services from their classroom teacher and all other staff persons at that school who are supporting that student. We also currently have 4 of our self-contained classrooms, and there are 3 at Eisenhower, 1 at Truman. These are for 3rd through 5th grade families that have selected that option when they were choosing to accept services. 3 classrooms are at Eisenhower, 1 is at Truman currently. In our middle schools, when we have students that are selecting classes and getting into that college and career preparation and beyond, we have students that are in advanced or accelerated courses that are in their English language arts courses. We have students who are on math pathways appropriate to their level and the excitement they have for math there, as well as for science opportunities. We have students that are attaining the high school credit for environmental science as 8th graders. In addition, though, we have all staff that are supporting highly capable students through differentiation, through maybe varying the outcome, the product, the other choices that are available dependent on their subject to how they serve the students. So it's not just something that happens in these courses, these are more course-based interventions. It is something that happens for students throughout their experience. Then when we move into high school, we are continuing that plan, that work that we're doing with students and their families to make sure that we have students aligned for that end goal, what they want to have in place, what they want to achieve, where they want to take themselves when they graduate from Vancouver. So we can see students in everything from advanced placement courses at their home high school to students who are attending Running Start at Clark, or students who are doing some of the college and the high school programs that we have as well. So that can look very different. With all of the magnet choices and schools of choice that we have in Vancouver, there are a lot of great things that students are doing at the high school level. So thank you. Next slide, please. So this year, as I mentioned before, we are in the process of identification. So what the process looks like is a big data collection from Universal Screener, but also from all of what we have with students. That can be referrals from the community, that can be other assessment information. So Universal Screener is one key, but that data collection is encompassing. And that data is what forms the portfolio that is reviewed for students. And then after that, we assemble a multidisciplinary selection committee, and that is defined by OSPI to a degree of some of the folks that we have to have. So as far as having the person who is coordinating the program, having an administrator, having someone who's able to interpret cognitive results from our assessments, those are pieces for it, but we can also add. And so this year, in addition to the required persons, we added our equity coaches, we added representation from special services, and we added our multilingual learner program representation there as well, because we really wanted to get at diversifying the students that are identified, who are recognized and brought into the program. This is in anticipation and support and interest for making sure that our group of highly capable students moves toward representing all of the students that we have in our district. And in that committee meeting, that is when those portfolios are reviewed. We look to see that if services would be beneficial for the student, and that is a holistic decision with all persons in the room adding to that conversation. After that committee meets, we have family notification period, which we are approaching soon for our 2nd through 9th grade families. And that's where families have the opportunity to accept services or not accept services, and then we move forward with services beginning. And so to give you a snapshot of where we are in the moment with that, on the right-hand side, you'll see in the last 3 years prior to this school year, what students were represented. We have the lighter colored boxes being our underrepresented student groups. So in this case, for highly capable, that would be students receiving free and reduced lunch, students in multilingual learner programs, and students who have IEPs. And then we have our typically represented students who are not in that twice exceptional category. And there is some consistency from 2019 to 2020. And then in 2021, introduced the portfolio process. And then this year in 2022, adding in those experts to better review more closely, review all students, has brought us to our new identification, current identification. And 2022 is in italics because those families have not yet accepted services. So we wouldn't want to say those are final numbers, but that is where we're at as of right now. We still have our kindergarten and 1st grade identification, which is coming up shortly, as well as we have our referral process that is continuing through May. So we anticipate adding to that number. Thank you. Next slide, please. So along those lines of making sure that we are identifying all students for highly capable services that are meeting those qualifications, that means that our services need to match those students in their need, because that is our purpose, is to support not only talent development, but also the support that follows through with that talent development. And so we have some opportunities to enhance, shift, make exciting what we're doing here to meet that more diverse student need as we are working forward with our student identification process. So 2 of the highlights from elementary schools is that I'm working with wonderful Jennifer and going to be connected with her team and supporting the Learning Lab experience for all students that are going to have that next year, so that that becomes a sustainable model that's brought and spread throughout the district and continued with all of that rich project-based learning, which is a personal favorite of mine. And another example is in clustering of students within classes for services, so that we can do some of that small group instruction and have learning buddies that are working on maybe, like I said, some of those maybe different choices of product or process, or what teachers are doing to differentiate for that student, so that students are having another learner with them. That's some of the social emotional piece for highly capable learners that has been something that's been of support, referencing some of those statistics that we shared earlier. In middle school, this looks like starting some really great and exciting project-based learning pieces to capture and share what the differentiation can look like in that lane, as far as giving students the opportunity to make learning customized to what they want out of the situation and where they want to grow their skill set. And so along that side, of course, making these real world experiences where students are changing their environment, having an effect, offering solutions, and really developing their talent within that. And then at the same time, backing that with instructional model support for staff so that they can work with students on those levels and have that time to adjust, to customize, to be there to support students from day to day, whatever their learning needs may be. And then looking at Zello integration with the forecast process as far as students who are taking all of the great work that they've done in middle school and transitioning forward into their high school and beyond plan. Some of this connects in the high school part when we're talking about the automated acceleration pathways that are in process that we are working toward, so that students are experiencing that continuum of preparation as they are looking toward college and career choices, so that those school pathways are really supporting those choices that they've made. And in that way, we can track and outline how a student is experiencing this support K-12 and make sure that this is a unified experience for students, for families, and that we are meeting not just a categorical need of highly capable, but also meeting every student day to day in what they might need. And also acknowledging that these practices that we want to put into place are supportive of learning across the board. And so we're very excited to be involved, to be welcomed in these, and to be able to work with students and staff. So that's my quick overview for all of you. Thank you so much. And I'd be happy to answer questions, and Christy and Darcy, I know, are available as well.
I have just a couple, I guess, technical questions. When you were talking about, and I guess I'm thinking primarily at the elementary level, the difference between like the gen ed classroom services versus self-contained. So when you're talking about like the gen ed classrooms, there's not, I mean, kids are just in their regular classroom, and the general ed teacher is not like a highly capable teacher. They're just your traditional classroom teacher, and they're just like differentiating towards the highly capable students with kind of their classroom lessons. Or can you tell me more about what that looks like?
Sure. And I've been to all but 2 schools in the district and spent time in classrooms to experience this. And what I can tell you is that elementary to elementary, school to school, that is going to have a different flavor on that. But for example, if there was a reading circles time, what that might look like is a general education teacher may cluster students who are experiencing the literacy skill at that time that they want to pull up and work with, while other students are engaged in some other activities. It can look like that would be one example, whereas with many of the self-contained classrooms, that might be something that is more widely distributed of an activity as opposed to small groups. So that's one of the most broad explanations, but please let me know if that's not answering your question.
No, that's helpful. And then, like you said, with the identification process, like right now you said parents are choosing to accept the services. Do they have a choice in whether to accept like self-contained versus, you know, the general education classroom? And then I guess, so we only have, I think you said 4 self-contained classrooms in the district. And is that based on the need? Like there aren't enough parents that are wanting that self-contained environment, so we only have 4? Or?
Thank you. Over the last handful of years, the interest in that selection has decreased over time, and I can provide the exact numbers. I can get that available for you. And that is, so for example, last year, families that received a letter saying that your student has been identified as benefiting from these services, would you like? Their letter last year did include the choice between a self-contained classroom and then neighborhood schools. But a student identified in middle school, for example, would not have had that same option on their letter. So
Okay.
those letters have not yet gone out this year. We anticipate later in February.
Okay, I was just trying to figure out if it's a choice or if there are, certain criteria for, the recommendation on our end or the district's end is for one or the other, but it sounds like it's parent choice.
But this is Kathy, sorry. I wish you could see my face, but Erin, that choice isn't given to every elementary school parent. Right, because historically anyway, there has been a cutoff where only a certain number of kids have been given that choice to go to self-contained.
Thank you for your question. There has been, as far as and this is my first year in it, so I'm speaking historically, and I have a program specialist available if we need those too. So the students that are, if the location is not their neighborhood school, then they would need to have transportation to attend to that school. The transportation is reimbursed, but they would need to have a family member or person who's able to transport them to that location if it is not their neighborhood school.
Okay.
So my understanding, and sorry, because I am familiar with HiCap. Well, it wasn't called HiCap in the past, but is that, and maybe it has changed over the course of the last couple of years, but my understanding was that they had the classes that they had, like the opportunities that they had, that the 4 classes, and the number of kids at the top of the level, basically the highest scoring kids were first given the opportunity to fill those spots. And then if there were spots left over, then they would go down the line, as opposed to saying, let's say your score is you score 99th percentile on the tests and the portfolios. And maybe this year we have enough kids that score at that spot to fill 6 classes. But that's not what we're offering. We're only offering 4.
So our program specialists let me know that that is an old practice that is not currently, I didn't want to speak to last year since I was not in the position that is not what happens currently.
So they do offer it to all the elementary school kids, and then that qualify, and then if we need more classroom space, we can offer more classroom space than we currently have.
So past practice had to do with the quantity of parents that opted in, and then that was how past meaning recent past had to do with the quantity of parents who had that request. So for example,
sorry, I just want to make sure I understand.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So for example, the 3rd grade classroom at Eisenhower has 23 students in it, and that's the only 3rd grade classroom. And I know, so they're not full classrooms. The one that's full is the 4th grade at Eisenhower.
Yeah, and Erin, sorry, I can,
Please,
Kathy, I can
you.
speak historically, like you, have a little history here. So yes, so what you're explaining is what was happening in the past. So we would have basically that cut, and if you qualified primarily on, test scores, and then we had the surveys that we would, provide teachers and parents. And so if you went through that process and if you qualified, then you would be given the choice, would you like self-contained or your neighborhood school? And in years past, we would have quite a few families who would choose that self-contained option, and they, could provide transportation and all that good stuff. And as we've come further and further along, that percentage, the percentage of parents who have opted into that self-contained has waned. And so that's why the number of classrooms has gone down so significantly, is because our families are not choosing, for whatever reason, they're not choosing that self-contained option.
Great, thank you for clarifying. Because I have that past history, knowing how things have changed is important. So thank you. Yes. And sorry, Tracy, I interrupted your line of questioning. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up just in terms of, I mean, because we do have our equity policy that is been a priority for the year and our goals. And if we like just think about removing barriers, is there thought around how we change the logistics so we maybe make transportation no longer an issue for families? I know that that's, I just wonder, it just full disclosure, I've kind of been through this process before, and just providing access to information and understanding, is there an opportunity for an open house? Is there an opportunity, like, so parents can understand what the options look like? Is there an opportunity to know in advance about mileage reimbursement? Because that usually doesn't get shared until a family signs up for self-contained, but that might impact a decision. I just wonder if there's a way, and maybe it's leaning into some data and talking to families about why they're making the selections they're making, but to understand why is the trend going the way it is, and are there any barriers we could remove that would even the playing field so all families have access?
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
absolutely. Just part of the purpose of this too is to kind of get a sense of where you as a board would like to see the programming go as well, and recognizing the equity policy and your focus of trying to remove barriers. What type of programming is going to work best? So I know that Dr. Lark and the team have thought about opportunities where we might want to explore. And so we're interested in kind of diving deeper with you all related to, just your vision of what this could look like. So, and Dr. Lark, I cut you off, and then it looks like Sandra has a question too.
That's all right. Thank you. Perfectly said.
Go ahead, Sandra.
Sorry, mute button is. I guess I wanted to know a little bit more as to how the support that will be given to VITA is kind of correlated to the HiCap. I guess, is it correlated that you will be supporting VITA, or how is HiCap benefiting from the support to VITA? I would like to know a little bit more about that.
Thank you. I've had some initial conversations with Jennifer as they're planning, and as all of that is exciting and being formed, I'm going to connect in as they are formulating that. So I'm just giving you a rough statement of that and what that can look like given background and interest of the whole team there, as well as myself, is being a support person who can help amplify that work as buildings bring the students to VITA, have their learning lab experience, and then come back. As of right now, it looks like when they come back, that would be a great place for myself to come and ensure that the momentum is continuing, the support is continuing for those teachers to share that learning experience and continue that throughout the year. So I think that the wonderful learning that's going to take place at that school will be good for all students. So it's not just I'm there to support highly capable students. I'm there to support talent development, and that kind of individualized learning experience for all of our students, I think, is going to be phenomenal. So it will be HiCap oriented as far as checking data, making sure that we're there for all students, but I think it will also be a cohesive support piece as well.
Part of what we want to do, and it relates to Tracy's prior question, is what instructional strategies can we use that will engage the majority of our students wherever they're approaching their learning, whether it's accelerated or we're working on some gaps that they might have, or they're learning a language. So it's a framework that we can use to more easily engage kids and differentiate their instruction. So the idea through VITA is that every teacher gets to experience it, and well, not every teacher, but as many as we can stuff through there, right? So that they get the idea of how this works, how students benefit, see the light in their eyes, and then take that back to their class, which Erin would be a great conduit for that information back and forth.
I have one more question about the clustering of students in the non-self-contained classes. Is that a practice that has currently or previously been used in terms of planning classrooms, in the sense of making sure there's 2 or 3 high cap buddies? You know, let's say my kid goes to Hazeldale Elementary, and making sure that a couple high cap kids are in the same classroom, or is that a newer strategy?
That is something that is used in many, if not most schools where possible. Different quantities of students would have different clustering persons, you know, depending on how the size there. What we would like to do alongside that practice would be to support it with data collection and sharing, so that we can have a more connected support, so that when we're communicating, when we're looking at our student achievement, when we're looking at growth goals, we are really seeing what students are achieving within the small group, as well as on a grander scale, such as when we look at our iReady scores. And I heard earlier, comparing apples to apples, that's going to be a piece to that, because then we'll have more information about students in an experience, and allowing teachers who are having like the Vita experience, that becomes a natural flow there. So it is clustering in a way that is happening all over, but it's going to be targeted and supported with that data piece, that thread that goes through.
And Kyle, many of our buildings, of our elementary buildings, will have something called What I Need, or Win Time, or something along those lines, where they get their core instruction, they get their full core instruction, and then they go into groups for, you know, enhancement, for scaffolding, for, you know, various needs. And so that's an opportunity both in math and reading that happens as well at many of our elementary schools. And what we would really like to do, what Christy was kind of building on, is provide all teachers with those strategies for differentiation, because we know that, you know, those lower students that need extra help, we work really hard, but sometimes we're not always aware that those high kids need that boost as well, because we want to see our high kids make the growth that, you know, we see our lower kids make. So we want to make sure that all of our teachers have that awareness, have those skills for differentiation all the way through, so that all their kids get their needs met.
Thank you. I mean, I love the idea of clustering so kids have a learning buddy to work with. I think that's great. But you also don't want it to be where all the high cap kids are in one class and then the classrooms are not balanced, because, you know, and this also just seems like a great opportunity for PLCs, right? Because then there's a lot of data sharing and collaboration by teaching teams. So
Right. And you have to just be careful too, because once you start clustering one group of kids, then it's a slippery slope. Like, who do you cluster next, and who do you cluster next? And then all of a sudden we're back to the 1970s, 80s tracking issue. So, and there's so much data, but so many of our high cap students also have some very specific and special social and emotional learning needs. And so to have those learning buddies, to have somebody that thinks like I do, like doesn't see the world the way everybody else is seeing the world, or doesn't make the connections the way I'm, somebody that makes connections, which to other kids might seem a little weird, but to somebody that's like them in there, they definitely need that. And it goes back to the social emotional survey, that sense of belonging and being a part. Sometimes if you're too different on either end of the learning curve, you don't feel like you're part of it. So to have somebody in there, but again, it can be a slippery slope. But Erin, I'm so glad you are doing this. You're amazing with your skills. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's an incredible compliment, Director Decker. Thank you so much. And you're highlighting something that's important to me. It's that highly capable is one designation of support. It doesn't, what a student may need that day, that moment, that lesson is something that's flexing. And so having some of these different pieces, that clustering focused on the SEL, wonderful. That clustering or that grouping may need to vary day to day, lesson to lesson, because if we're caring for the whole child, we are flexible and responsive to those individual needs that can and do change. We're not making assumptions that they're at this level or that level for the duration of their learning. We're making sure that we're there for the student every day. So thank you.
Being piggyback on that, I just wanted to say that I think like I've said before, numbers and data is, I think, is great, but I think I would love to hear more also on the stories of these students. Like, how are these students, how are they feeling in these classrooms? Are they feeling like like we said, all their needs are being met? Is this program really challenging them? I know that they're challenging them academically, but how is it challenging them socially? How are they, I guess I'm speaking on what Jeff is talking about, like how can we, what we want. I think I would like to know more on. I think these students are not just, I mean, I know that's the focus of the program is their academics, but I think each student has a story. And I think that's what I would like to hear more about is, and also not just the elementary, but students who have been who've gone through these challenge programs, and maybe talking to these students on how we can bring more students in, like how can we improve, and what is it that they liked about the challenge program, what they didn't like, how can we as a district change that? Because I think really the student voice is what we need to focus on through this program. And if it's lacking in numbers, then I think there's something that we're doing wrong. And I think we need to figure that out. And I think the students are the ones who have the best voice here.
Thank you. That is a wonderful wonderful perspective that we want to echo and uphold and are starting that work on. If you know me, and I hope you get to know me, you will know that I love stories and love storytelling. And our wonderful program specialist was just yesterday at Fort with an Asian Pacific Islander student group, getting to know them and what is important of that. It's a little step and a little storytelling to look toward one of our groups that has been historically underrepresented in this program in this school, in our district, in many places. And so really getting to the heart of that and being people who are stepping back and listening instead of stepping forward and informing or directing. So that is a big piece of what we're doing. And I thank you also for including secondary students. And we have some data to share at further dates as far as what the program looks like for secondary students, where our opportunities will be in support of some of those things you spoke to. And again, creating that K-12 continuum of experience where your story matters, and it matters from the minute you step in until you graduate. And even then, we're cheering you on, because there is room for us to make that something that is a welcoming, caring piece for every student.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I've appreciated this presentation very much. I think one thing as we go forward, I think the intersection of social emotional learning and highly capable is very interesting to me, because I know that sometimes what might come easily academically, other situations are more challenging. And I know that's just an area, like just how we scaffold those supports and how we kind of create the best opportunity for all of the students.
And then I would have like going forward, as we start to open up the high cap, as we start to really look at inclusivity and equity, how are we supporting the teachers and the administrators in these buildings to also look at these programs differently? Now they're not just the kids that sat and listened longer and were able to focus better, but it's different than it was 15, 20 years ago. And how are we making sure that the people, not only the teachers, but also the administrators in the building, are understanding what high cap is now, not what it used to be? So that would be something I'd be interested in seeing in the future.
Thank you.
This is not really a question just to Erin, but I think to the board and to Dr. Snell. The word self-contained, I guess I'm a little confused. I guess I asked it in more of a, because I guess I've understood self-contained to be for our special education students who are needed in a self-contained classroom. And so I was, at the beginning of this, I was kind of confused with the word self-contained because I didn't know that that's what I guess this classroom was also perceived as, I guess. And so my question, I guess, is that maybe also a reason why parents are choosing not to participate? And, like, because I think, I don't know, so that's something, as this is not a question, is a discussion, because I guess I'm just wondering if maybe there's a way of changing the wording to make it more inclusive.
Yeah.
I guess I wanted to put it out there just because I felt confused, and I can imagine that other parents who don't know what this is, and saying if you want to opt into a self-contained classroom, I don't know if all parents would choose that.
Thank you, Sandra. I think that's a great point on how we label. You guys have also, the board has brought up, access and information in general is important. And then I think as well, just like, what is the programming that we want, right? Like, so is the change of numbers reflective of our not providing access and communication, or is it a change in what parents want for their kids? And so trying to unpack that and understand that would be an important component of what we do next, in addition to the direction that you all provide. I know in the lead up to the presentation, there was also some questions around twice exceptional students. And so I'm wondering if Dr. Larkey, because we've talked about identifying, you gave the example of story with some of our students from Pacific Islander descent. Could you talk a little about twice exceptional, and that just from a standpoint of what that is, and then maybe we'll wrap things up for this presentation this evening.
Thank you. So twice exceptional in identifying students who are receiving services from more than one program. Sometimes we have thrice exceptional students as well. So something that is a part of what we are asked to do by the state as far as serving students and ensuring that we are serving students equitably. So that is a piece of what we're doing now, as well as of interest in some upcoming legislation that is currently in the House right now with regard to districts and transparency. And I have our data for what we currently have. So for example, our Pacific Islander students before this year, we had 2 out of the 972 that we currently have are Pacific Islander, and 0 are in self-contained. Just for a different statistical comparison, our students and families identifying as white, we have 650 in the not self-contained classrooms and 70 in the self-contained classrooms. So you can see those statistics, and I have these and am ready and excited to share this data that we're working with and looking at as we're examining things with all of you at the future times as is appropriate. So that's something that tells us that we had an opportunity that we were missing as far as identifying students and serving students. And so that just informed that one piece of our connection with the Fort community, as well as with Geyser, because there's an interest there in creating those student groups to serve students who don't have that opportunity or have not had those connections. So that's just one piece. We're starting to tie these threads together and catch those student and family voices and check in with the services.
And Dr. Lark, in addition, also students who are receiving, you mentioned twice or thrice receiving additional services. So that would include students who are receiving IEP services. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And so tracking those students who, what is our rate of service? What does that look like? I know those are questions that the board is interested in, that we can dive deeper in, because I think if we were to set goals at a district level, I I know the board is very interested in having our programs represent our community as a whole. And those data points, I know you are as well, Dr. Lark. So those are areas that I think are important to dive deeper into. And we'll look forward to those conversations as we look at identifying some next level action steps related to this programming. So I want to make sure if there's any other questions or opportunities to just kind of comment on the presentation before we transition.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here, Jeff, because I haven't had a chance to, and it's been a great conversation. So I apologize to Erin in advance because my questions are going to be kind of all over the place. So I was jotting more things down as more and more people kind of jumped in. One of my questions is the 972 students who are identified as high cap. Does this include, like, at the secondary level, are we including in that number any of our students who are they're enrolled in, say, AP classes or the IB program? Are they default considered high cap, or are these only the 972 students, the ones who have gone through like the portfolio review and like gone through the identification process specifically?
Thank you for your question. Someone unexpectedly came into my area, so I had the mic snafu, sorry. So with that question, so the students that are in high school currently would not have experienced the portfolio review. They would have been entered on a different identification process. So just want to clarify that. At one point in time, a couple of years ago, there was a changeover in data that any student in an AP course was marked as highly capable. However, our program specialist, Desiree Wright, has spent extensive time this year combing through all of the records for our current students in the district to ensure that there is not that mislabeling that happened in prior years, because we did find some data mismatches there. And so that has been corrected. So this 972 are from families who have accepted services.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I also wanted to ask, I think it's fantastic. We've added people with other areas of expertise, like our equity coaches, for example, on the committee, the multidisciplinary selection committee.
Mm-hmm.
Do we include anyone with expertise in either special services or special education on that committee?
Yes, we had actually we had 2 to 3 people there for every meeting. I say that because one of our wonderful equity coaches also was a special education person in prior years, so they had double. And then we had our wonderful Teresa Vance, who has been a psych, but is also our TOSA for counselors. And we had Brian Matheson as our administrator in his role with counseling and as an assistant director. And so, yes, and then on some days we had extra people. So it was really wonderful because with that expertise, we had people who could tell the stories of students who may have unique or different situations there that we can be supportive of. And when we're looking at data, we can be understanding of how that might manifest in that portfolio in a way that's supportive to students. And just to be clear, in our discussions, it is about including students in data. And so there's not any one test score or comment or anything like that that would exclude students from services.
Right, thank you. You mentioned you have the data. You mentioned that you'd be willing to share it, and I would be very curious to see the level of interest of parents who have expressed interest in the self-contained high cap classroom. You said it has diminished over the years. I would be very curious to see what that data looks like. And then I would also second, I think it was Kyle that mentioned something like an open house or something like that, an information night for parents. I know in my experience, the time frame between getting the letter and having to check the box and send it back is very, very short window of time. And I know I had to do a whole lot of research and talk to a whole lot of people before I made a decision. And so I think it would be really helpful for parents, one, to have a little bit more time, and two, to have some sort of open house, much like we have with the dual language program, or so that people know what the options are when they're making the choices, because it's not really clear what the differences are between the two options, other than it's at this school or the neighborhood school.
Thank you for that commentary. I've been attending, I just recently attended the Magnet Fair and had a high cap table there.
Oh, nice.
And the same feedback came from families that were checking out the magnet programs. We said, we're really glad you're here. We would love to have continued information like this. So thank you for that as a parent, as their director as well.
I think it would be interesting to see too, with more information and more opportunity to learn about the programs, how that might affect the numbers of people choosing one over the other. And I think also, as we become a little bit more expansive in what we identify as highly capable, that, I mean, you said our numbers are about 4% of enrollment now, but the target is between 5 to 10%. And that's a huge difference.
I'm sorry.
So,
Yes.
I mean, that may lead to an increased number of families choosing that too. The last thing I have in my notes is just you had mentioned about in the general ed classrooms that, you know, the clustering of students, which I think is great, and the idea that as those general ed teachers increase their awareness and they develop their skills, that they're better able to serve those students, the high cap students in their classrooms, which is true. And especially if you've got a small group of them, frankly, it's easier than if you've just got one by themselves, you know. It's easier for the students and this teacher both, but I think that there's also needs to be an emphasis on providing those general education teachers with adequate resources to provide those enhancements or those accelerated learning, because I think like you got a 4th or a 5th grader who potentially is doing middle school or even high school level, say math or reading. That's not something that's not curriculum that's necessarily going to be in the building even. So making sure that they have the resources they need to provide that acceleration to students at whatever level they're at, I think is really, really, really important. I say as a general ed teacher, having access to those resources makes all the difference a lot of times. And then finally, thank you very much, Erin. It's good to see you.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you so much.
I appreciate all the work that you've done in this. And like Kathy, I have great faith in you and your abilities. And I know that our program is in good hands. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm honored.
Thank you for the great discussion. And we were trying to take notes during as well and captured some of the questions. And then I will loop back to the board through our regular update with that document so that as you further reflect and see the questions and comments that you can add to that. And that will help us plan the next layer of this. So your attention to that is greatly appreciated. I think with that, I will reshare my screen and we'll move on to our third topic of the night, which is related to board development, that goal. And as I'm doing that, again, thanks to our presenters who've been with us this evening already. And you're welcome to leave as a presenter if you would like and join as a participant or whatever it is that suits your fancy. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Brett. And as you know, like this is my first time going through the budget cycle with you all. I had the opportunity to jump on last spring and kind of be a part of it. But we're curious, just as a lead in for Brett, you know, looking at past practices, what is it that worked well for you as a board to get to a point to approve in a budget? And where are there opportunities that we might just think differently about the process? And then the added layer of the federal relief funding is just another layer of, we're grateful for that resource, but it does present another layer of complexity to what's already a very complex public schools budget process. So Brett, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Snell. I apologize, you guys are focused mostly on the document anyway, but my camera is acting up now too, so it must be contagious, Kathy. So I'll work on that tomorrow.
Oh no, another contagion, oh my goodness.
Exactly. So as Dr. Snell alluded to, we wanted to just kind of refresh your memory as kind of that high level overview of the fundamentals that we execute as part of the budget process. Talk a little bit about the uniqueness of this coming budget cycle as it relates to ESSER, and then seek some feedback from you all as to how we can most effectively engage in this collective work. So again, just to refresh your memory, we always start our budget process with enrollment forecast. And as you know, that's the primary, if not almost unique driver of our state revenues. the lion's share of which comes in the basic ed and special education funding formulas. So we start with that because that also then helps us determine our other big budget driver, which is staffing allocations. As you know, staff is our most expensive part of the budget, consuming somewhere, in the high 70s or low 80s as a percent of our expenditures. So we need to use the enrollment forecast to determine what are the staffing needs based on those state funding formulas applied to that forecasted enrollment. And then we always have a layer of local levy enhancements that we're able to deploy to meet the needs of our students in that staffing process. Once we have those major drivers assembled, we can start to then focus on some of the other things that we know don't necessarily stay static year over year. An example might be our local levy. We do build in an inflationary increase in that. We have occasionally new salary and benefit drivers that we have to incorporate across the board as a result of either legislative action or possibly local bargaining. And then certainly when we look at our MSOCs or those non-employee related costs, non-salary costs, whether it's a new contract or a dramatically more expensive contract, or maybe the obsoleteness of a contract that we previously resourced, we try to gather those big variances and help that kind of mesh with the budget picture that's coming into focus. And then as a result of that work, then we get to number 4 on the list here, where we can start to project what a bottom line impact of all of these variables looks like. And in tougher times, we have to start talking about, do we need to make reductions to kind of the status quo roll forward with these variances? Or more optimistically, we can look at, is there some surplus revenues in this budget picture that we can use to invest in new student needs or priorities that have been under-resourced in the past? So that's kind of the high level overview. One of the big anomalies we have this year, or variances from year to year, that we unfortunately don't have in traditional budget cycles, is this influx of ESSER funds. And so just to refresh your memory, we really started ESSER 2 years ago, but this is really the biggest year or the first year of the big investments of ESSER 2 and 3. And so we're halfway through, if you want to look at it as kind of a 2-year cycle of that big investment of those, again, ESSER 2 and 3 allocations. We're halfway through the first year. We have to have them fully spent by the end of next year, largely, although the way they staggered it, it does have 1 month into the following school year, fiscal year for us, which is September 2023. So what we did in the 2021-22 budget cycle is we tried to forecast those student needs and make priority decisions on empowering staff to develop the programs that we were aware of were student needs for both 2021 and 22, or excuse me, 2021-22 and the 2022-23 fiscal year. So in essence, we kind of allocated the entire bucket of money. What we now know, and we kind of anticipated at that time, is it's very difficult to implement that many programs on the ideal timeline that we would have liked to have, whether it's hiring challenges or just other things that were built into those initial budget projections that were not necessarily what we're seeing in reality right now. We're hoping that that's going to free up some money for us to look again during the 2022-23 budget cycle. One of the major variables in that is whether we have that savings or not will be what happens in the legislative session, because we know that we did lose significant amount of revenues in the current year as a result of enrollment. We're optimistic and hopeful that the legislature may recognize the uniqueness of that lost revenue and the other needs that we've had to bring to bear as a result of the pandemic, and restore some or all of that revenue. If they do, then I think we would be in a very good position to have additional ESSER money to invest. If they choose not to do that, then that will constrain the ability for us to reallocate ESSER money significantly. So assuming that we do have some money to possibly reinvest or look at additional opportunities in 2022-23, what we would do is start with kind of studying the impact that has been made by the programs that were implemented this year and were projected to continue into next fiscal or school year. And so we're obviously looking at that through the lens of student impact and what we identified as those student needs and how successful we've been at making progress in those areas. And we're hoping to have data collected by February 28th of 2022, kind of updating the progress on those existing initiatives. And that would be a useful lens again for us to look at, do we need to shift funding to recalibrate some things, or there's some additional emerging needs that we hadn't anticipated last year at this time that we could then bring to a discussion. And we've kind of targeted the April of this spring board study session as maybe a reasonable time to have that data collected and assessments made to begin that discussion. So that's kind of the traditional year, the uniqueness of ESSER. And so we also wanted to use this opportunity to check in with you all. Last year, I believe it was Kyle and Wendy had volunteered to serve on a budget subcommittee of the board. And so we went through a tremendous amount of detail in a couple different Zoom sessions. And I don't believe anybody fell asleep. So that was a positive that I'm going to hang my hat on. But I guess the question that we really want to pose to you all, we're still kind of in this limited ability to interact in person and pour through a lot of things in the normal forms that we might like. But did last year's process, did it work well? Was there particular things that we should maintain or possibly think differently about? And really specifically, I kind of made a lighthearted comment, but was the work that the budget committee did last year, was it kind of too detailed to be able to really share out with the rest of the board? Or was that the right level of detail to go in and kind of talk about the evolution of the enrollment forecasts and the staffing models that we use? And then, yeah, I guess the last thing is just that general question around, are there other ideas or thoughts that you have to more effectively be able to monitor and review and provide input into the budget cycle?
Thank you, Brett. So we would invite, obviously, feedback on these questions, but also in the previous slides, if there was any questions or comments as we help kind of plan the cycle ahead.
Okay, this is Kathy. And I just want to once again thank Brett for being so clear when he explains the budget process, the thoughtfulness that goes into it, and the timeline. Because while this is not my strong suit, it makes it easier for me to follow, and I understand what you're telling me, and which is a lot more than can be said from when my husband walks me through things like this. So I really appreciate how much you teach us every time you talk to us about the budget process. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that very much.
I'm just going to jump in here really quickly because I was on the budget committee, or budget review committee last year with Kyle, and it was not too detailed for me, but I like more detail the better. But I guess my question would be, I felt obviously very well informed and like I understood the budget very well by the time it came up for a vote in our board meeting. But I guess my question would be more for the other board directors that weren't on that budget review committee, if that process worked for them, and whether they felt like they were getting the information they needed. We got all kinds of information in those committee meetings, which was great. I definitely was not falling asleep. So I guess I would be curious if from the other board directors, whether that worked for them. It worked great for me. And I think Kyle would say the same, but for the other directors, if there was any other steps in between the committee and the report to them that they would like to see added.
That was, you just took the question out of my mouth. I loved Brett's bird walks, and I found the sessions really informative and the detail I needed to feel comfortable, because I hadn't necessarily felt that same level of comfort in years past. But I know this is also an area that I really like to lean in on. So I want to make sure that the opportunity is available in some format to everyone who might want more detail.
All right, it's Kathy again. I felt like there were moments when I'm like, oh, do I really need to know that? Or do I really understand that? But I felt like by having that board budget committee dive in deep, when I had questions, not only could I contact Brett, but I also felt like I could contact one of you two, and you had been in on the session and you could walk me through things that I had questions about. And I agree with Wendy. In addition to choosing a new superintendent, this is one of the most important things that a school board does. So it's very important to me that we have as much detail as possible. And I love having the board budget committee available for me to ask questions as well as talk to Brett about it. But I never felt like I didn't understand it. And I never felt like we didn't have that, we had too much information at all. So I appreciated it last year.
Sandra, I don't know if you had a chance to really go through the process last year, so it might be some time that Brett and I could take with you to walk you through what we did last year and get your feedback on it, because you were joining at the tail end of the process. So that's an opportunity that we can provide for you. But also as co-chair and chair, Director Barros and Director Isabella Ortega will be a part of the so you have the budget committee, and then you have the leadership committee is setting the agenda and getting more opportunities to go deeper as well. So there is that structure that can support the process in addition.
Even though I didn't become part of the process, Director Smith and Dr. Sproul were very informative, and they helped me a lot through the budget as well when I did have to decide on anything. And I think also Brett has an open door policy, so I don't feel that I'm excited, I guess, to know more about the budget now in the next few months. And I think I love that I don't feel that, I think really the conversation is that the transparency is great, and I think I'm looking forward to that.
Can I ask a couple questions about process for this year relating to last year with ESSER funds? Brett put together that detailed spreadsheet prioritizing different projects, and I love that it was kind of proposals from all across the district, and it was very comprehensive, and then it was whittled down, and some overlapped and there was more research. But I liked that we got those glimpses at different points in time to see how the prioritization of the funding worked. And I do know that we discussed it in the budget committee, maybe in more detail, but it was always then also brought back out to the board. And I'm not saying it needs to be a spreadsheet, and definitely don't do a 5-tab spreadsheet just for the sake of the board, but it seemed like that was a working document that was a tool for the budget team.
Well, I guess the first thing I would say in full disclosure, that was Jeff's work actually that put together that prioritization and summarization. I had a much lengthier, clumsy version of that data that he organized into something that made sense. So But I guess that means he has to do it again this year now too, though.
Well,
So
I wouldn't have guessed it because it wasn't a Google Sheet. It was a spreadsheet. So
No, Brett and I have tag teamed that again, and we're actually using that same spreadsheet that we brought forward to you to loop back to the individual parties that were responsible for the programming that was funded. And so we're looking at that from collecting some, analytical quantitative data around the impact, but then also the qualitative data. As you know, implementing something new, an educational programming during a pandemic year and trying to collect data in February, with staffing shortages, not all these programs have been able to run to what they had hoped, right? And so we don't want to say no to funding for next year just based on we don't have enough data quite yet. So we're trying to empower those stakeholders to also tell the story of what's behind that program and what they hope to accomplish in year 2, now that they have, staff in place or whatever it might be. So we're going to do a series of short Zoom meetings with all those people and talk about the data collection, and then ask them to report in some way, and then also ask them to prioritize what would be the ask next year if only worried about their own little slice of the pie. We will sort through that in March and April, and then bring it to you in some sort of format similar to what you saw last year. That would help you then prioritize for us, probably not down to the granular level of each program, but more, I think last year you talked about broad brushstrokes of well, we would really like it to affect the student experience, or we would really like it to address this, or we talked about some infrastructure support last year as part of this, that one-time funding, right, is good to invest in infrastructure. And so we did some of that, whether it's in technology or air filtration or PPE, some of those kinds of investments. So we're discussing a similar process, and it sounds like, at least from your perspective, Kyle, that would be helpful.
And in your data review, I would be interested, because I know that last year we really prioritized investment in lower staff student ratios and just smaller classrooms, especially at the elementary school level. And it's something I've definitely noticed on my site visits. And I don't want to oversimplify it with iReady scores and small classes versus big classes, but I would like to know kind of if there is a sweet spot of that investment. Because I know, my gut instinct tells me smaller class sizes are good, but, when we're dealing with 12,000 elementary school students or so forth, can the data help us find that sweet spot, I guess?
Yeah, the research data related to that is kind of one level of that, and there's been a lot of work around class sizes and its impact and the sweet spot kind of that. The other part of that is one of the data points that drove that was staff input, and they talked about the coming out of the hybrid model, and the ability to differentiate with smaller groups of students was an important driver coming into this year, not knowing what the year was going to look like. And so we valued that data point as much as the potential impact to students, just trusting our staff expertise and their experience in remote to hybrid and coming into this year. Now, obviously, we had hoped that we were a little further along, and I'll talk pandemic in another minute or two here, but we're still dealing with that, right? And so that could be a driver going into next year too, knowing that these funds are related to the pandemic. And if we feel like we want to, we roll up our enrollment and make projections, as Brett said, but it's difficult to do that the last couple of years. It's just kind of a new ballgame with that. And, maybe we want to be a little more aggressive, I guess, in our staffing, just knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty. Another driver of that would be the legislative session, right? And if there's some support there or not, at some point we will have to correct to enrollment, because that's just the name of how public schools work in the state of Washington. But it would be nice to do that over a series of years, especially knowing the impact that it's had on students and staff. And I can tell you, even though it does feel as you walk the schools that, class sizes are smaller, if you ask an individual teacher, I'm pretty sure they're going to say like, I'm at my wit's end, right? Like I'm doing everything I can here. So let's not talk about increasing class sizes. So.
Well, I mean, the information I've gotten from principals, and they've been so welcoming, but just the data points that they're pulling from fall data and just showing the breadth of how the extent of differentiation in each classroom, even when there's only 12, 13 students, 14 students. So, it does seem like a powerful tool right now.
So we'll keep looping back to this. We're early on, so we wanted to get ahead of this and start doing some planning because there's a lot of kind of big ships to turn to get all these things lined up. The other good thing is this is a short legislative session and all indicators are that it will finish near on time. So that's very helpful in the planning process as well. So some of those variables will hopefully be kind of taken care of. And as you go through the enrollment staffing budget process every year, there's a series of unknowns that you're trying to check off, right? And the more you can check those off, then the more certain you can be with your budget going forward. So looks like Director Decker has a question.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we loop in the very important equity policy to this discussion, and perhaps, have Janelle or her team, help set some priorities along with Brett about what our goals are for providing equity at the budgeting level.
Thank you, Kathy. That is written into the draft policy. And we actually this afternoon had a planning meeting with our teaching and learning directors and Janelle and Daniel Bettis from Special Services and Brett talking about the staffing budgeting process. We're all going through the first cycle together too. Like we have new staff members, and so we're talking about what historically has worked well in that process to get the resources to where they need to be with as efficiently as possible. And where are opportunities for us to improve moving forward. So, and as you know, from your direction, we've flattened the organization in me coming on board. And so there are more cooks in the kitchen when it's related to teaching and learning as you're going out and visiting schools with different people that are leading the work. And so there needs to be some calibration time. And so we're spending time together to talk through these processes. That probably isn't as efficient as it was previously, but I think in the long run, we're going to benefit from the collaboration and look forward to whatever policy is adopted that gives us some direction related to that, Kathy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Brett, thank you so much for presenting. And I'm going to share my screen for one last time here. And I'll walk through where we're at with our pandemic planning and response. So case rates are kind of not really even an indicator anymore, to be honest. They just have gone through the roof, and the metrics that we used before around low, moderate, substantial, and high risk areas aren't metrics that are being used by the Department of Health or locally to make determinations around in-person like they were early on in the pandemic. And so it's just like, it's still a data point that I want to show, but as you all know, we're fighting a different battle right now. Still this slide is, I think it might be the same as what I shared last week, except I updated the weekly chart. And our dashboard is updated on every Wednesday with weekly totals. And then as I've talked to you before, each school has daily updates. And as we report those out, the case, I always use my phone as an indicator. You open an email and then you can kind of scroll through, and in the fall, I'd scroll like once, and that would be our cases for the district. And now I'm like, well, last couple of weeks I was scrolling like 5 times, right? and now I'm down to like 2 times again. So we definitely are seeing some sort of flattening out of it, but it's very different than what we experienced before. The good news is that the linkage to outbreaks in the school is still a very, very small percentage. So the cases are happening in the community and they're here. And unfortunately for students, families, and staff, it's presenting a lot of challenge right now. I'm trying to provide, as I told you before, a new slide related to our testing data. And so we have seen our daily tests drop. So our high point was the week of ending January 14th, where we were doing about 300 tests a day. And then last week, we did about 177 tests per day. I didn't get Friday's data in here, but the test per day is a good indicator, regardless of how many days we do in the week. We have still been experiencing staffing shortages in some of these areas. So we had to pause services on our testing today, and we're kind of redeploying staff to reopen that on the next couple of days. And then we won't be providing services on Friday, which is a non-student attendance day, and then trying to get back in action on Monday. That I do a visual test too. If I get a chance to be out and about, I try to walk down and talk to our staff that run the testing center. They're off of JPC. And the numbers definitely, like, there used to be cars all the way out into the street, and now, you know, there's 4 or 6 cars deep kind of thing. And it was sure a lot nicer when it was sunny this week too, because there's been some horrible weather days that they're out there trying to do that. So hats off to them. And Brett's done a great job of leading this work too. We also, the other thing that we ran into was a shortage of tests. The ESD really stepped up and is trying to procure tests as a region. We're also talking across the region, so doing some sharing across districts, just to kind of piece it together each week. And then hopefully the tests will come. Unfortunately, I think one of our partners in public health said that probably when we really get all the tests in, the need for the tests will probably, so we're always kind of mismatched with supply and demand. But I guess that's the nature of working in a pandemic. So this is good data for you. I'm excited to share this slide with you. We've been tracking daily student attendance. We have this broken out by school, so we can look down at each school and what's happening. We've definitely had some schools that have been more adversely affected with attendance than others. But as a district, we are definitely rallying. So we're back up to that first day after winter break levels, after a low point there around January 14th or so. So that's trending in a positive direction. And then also our staff, and I need to turn this into a chart. I apologize. It's getting bigger now that we're tracking this every day, but just call your attention to the bottom line here. This is our percent absent and unfilled numbers. So 29 unfilled certificated positions yesterday. That is incredible. I mean, when you look at where we've been at, that's huge. So it tells us that our sub pool is coming back as well, because they're affected through this too. And it tells us that our certificated staff are doing better in terms of being out. And then on the classified side as well, numbers are trending in a positive direction there too. So those are all real positive indicators. So what does that mean? Still checking in. Our check-in with public health yesterday, the hospitals are hanging in there, basically, is what they said. They do expect, unfortunately, the death rate is the lagging indicator. So we have case rates, we have hospitalizations, and then we have death rate. And so they are anticipating that will go up, but overall, probably we've gotten over the hump. But nobody really wants to say that because they're worried that maybe we haven't gotten over it. So they continue to support us with, monitoring situations and advising us if there's something that we need to be paying closer attention to. Sorry. And they are not recommending that we shut down a school to mitigate and try to slow the spread. The spread's out there. They're just advising that we approach it from a staffing level. As we talked about last time, we did have a short-term plan based on staff shortages. We're in the third week of that. So we've done the rotations between our secondary schools. And this week it's Hudson's Bay High School, Discovery Middle School, Geyser Middle School, and our programs of choice at the secondary level. The other two sets went through it the previous weeks, and we did see a bounce back in attendance in those schools. As I looked at that initial data, it's one day at a time. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's like this magical, if you take 4 days of remote, then all of a sudden everybody's attendance is better. But we're always glad to see that there is a bounce back from that. Based on what we're seeing in the data that I shared with you, we expect to return to pre-contingency 1 plan service levels. And I'm trying not to say return to normal because nobody knows what normal is, right? But prior to having to implement that contingency plan, we were transporting all kids. We had in-person learning for everyone that wanted that. And that's what we're hoping to be able to do on January 31st. We are, though, also planning for the next wave and recognizing that transportation is probably our most vulnerable point, and trying to have up with as many different models as we can. And so right now we're looking at a potential, our district hasn't experienced this a whole lot, but a lot of districts will have snow routes, in certain situations that, you can't get up Livingston Mountain, so it's a snow route. And so we're looking at expanding the walk zones in certain situations and having those kinds of routes for emergencies, a contingency, but still allow everybody to be in person. And so we're going to have some communication that would go out this week. Not that we're doing that. And I know that people will still, they'll read the headline and maybe think that we're not doing that. We're coming back to in person next week, but we're also trying to plan as many different ways to continue this through the year, not knowing necessarily what's ahead. So this contingency plan, from a district perspective, has worked well. I know from an individual's perspective, I want to be appreciative that it challenges everybody in unique ways. So it's not like a success story, but we were able to get through it, and it looks like what we were hoping to accomplish is working. We're having staff and students come back. So more to come on that front. Hopefully we never have to implement that. We're looking good right now, but I just want to make you aware that we're not just waiting for something to happen. We're planning accordingly. So that is the pandemic planning update. I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there's any questions about that. Okay. I appreciate your attention this evening. I think 3 topics in pandemic is probably the right amount to be able to kind of stay focused at the end of a day. Your questions were great. Will help inform, kind of the next layer of what we do. And I'll turn it back to Director Barros.
All right, that is it for our agenda for this evening. Thank you, Dr. Snell, and all of our district staff that presented tonight. I think it was great information. Thank you to my fellow directors for the discussion that we had and questions. And with that, we are adjourned at 7:18 p.m. Thank you, guys.